One of the most fun things about being a writer is that you get to ask all sorts of really interesting questions and let curiosity get the better of you, and people think it's like semi-normal. I remember the time I went to the eye doctor, and I asked him all kinds of questions about, like, what does this do? Why are you doing that? And stuff like that. And fortunately, he was a good sport about it. And I remember asking him, I'm like, okay, you guys say never to look at the sun because it's bad for your eyes. Why then do you shine this big shiny light in our eyes until we can't see? And he laughed and he's like, well, that kind of light is better for your eyes than looking at the sun. So it's a temporary thing. And it just helps me to be able to see the back of your eye. I'm like, oh, okay, interesting. But at least I asked the question because I'm sure we've all wanted to ask that question. And then there was the other time, you know how like you go to the dentist and they always ask you these questions. Of course, they ask you the questions when they have their fingers in your mouth and you're like, well, I can't even answer that. So at one point when the lady took her fingers out of my mouth, I was like, okay, so do you ever get bored of like asking people questions and stuff? Do you ever just want to like talk about your life at all? Do you get like annoyed that it always has to be about the other person? I mean, maybe you have some cool stuff going on in your life too. And she goes, yeah, well, I guess it could be that way, but in reality, it would be really boring if I talked about myself like all day long and just told the same stories to different people all day. I would much rather hear from somebody else and hear their stories than to talk about mine. And I'm like, hey, that's really valid. That makes so much sense, actually. Which, as a writer, I can appreciate because as much as I love telling my own stories, the only reason I have any stories to tell, really, is because other people tell me their stories, and then I'm like, oh, that's great. I think I can work that into fiction somehow. So anyway, yes, if you're a writer, be curious. Ask lots of questions. The worst that can happen is people give you a weird look, and the best that can happen is you get more story fodder. Perfect!